Leaving the PS1 Armored Core entries had me excited to see how the sequel, Armored Core 2, would evolve, especially as it debuted on a new system, the PlayStation 2. I'm not one to usually place high expectations, but something about those PS1 entries had me hooked ever since I finished them, in how the story presented itself, the highly variable gameplay that had me going back and forth on my methods and strategies, the music that felt so experimental for its time. It's certainly an amalgamation of different ideas that one would think it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but the impression that it left on me was one of curiosity, just the same way I jumped from Sekiro to Elden Ring and Bloodborne. Games that leave you wanting more experience like this, and FromSoft nails that. So, on the onset, having seen nothing about the game, my idea of Armored Core 2 was of a game that would elevate the formula just enough to feel distinct and introduce new gameplay mechanics and elements that would shake up the balancing as most sequels do. Not just that, but also see how the narrative would evolve post AC1, where the aftermath of its events led to a very turbulent sequence of years that followed. What I didn't expect, however, after beating it and getting halfway through Another Age, was how the game stuck close to its guns when it came to the formula established in the previous 3 games, and instead of implementing drastic changes, they simply iterated on the structure, and the extra horsepower of the PS2 was used to enhance the presentation. And while on the gameplay sense it doesn't push for much in innovation, what it does elsewhere is to further immerse you in that universe, whether it be the customization, the elaborate mission design, the enhanced visuals, or the narrative. Armored Core 2 is one of those rare games where I don't hate it to the brim or love it to death, but I can't stop thinking about the most, simply due to how great of a time I had with it. Taking place 70 years after the events of the era covering the first 3 games, a corporation known as Zeomatrix discovers plans for a research project that takes place on Mars, being previously in possession of Murakumo Millennium. Given the advantage, they send out a team to begin research immediately, and as time goes by, it subsequently causes the atmosphere on the Mars surface to adapt to the equivalent present on Earth. These chain of events lead other corporations to join in on the matter as soon as they learn of it, and with it, they also bring the competitive atmosphere present on Earth, like the 30-year war between Chrome and Murakumo had, for example. To minimize such catastrophic events from happening again, the Earth government establishes the Large-Scale Enterprises of the Central Committee, or LLC for short, on Mars to try and keep a tight leash on the corps rummaging the new planet. And in the midst of everything, a replacement for the Raven's Nest was introduced, as the newly established Nerves Concord, another arbitration group that deals with third parties on the behalf of the Ravens and other potential clients. From the jump, the thing that stood out the most for me was the leap from the PS1 to PS2, which is immense. Going from an assortment of pixels that just happened to be 3D to a bigger and meaner, fully cleaner, clear and sharp look had me shook for like the first 2 minutes when the tutorial began, and quite literally, the game proudly showcases how visually next-gen it was for its time, when you seep your eyes into the detail of the models thanks to the increased polygonal capacity, the more clearly defined environments where the scale of a location now feels more believable and threatening, or the attention to detail that each individual part receives. And as I say all this, Armored Core at its heart is just a PS1 entry through and through. The mission design remains the same of highly variable mission design. The level design mostly remains as simple as the PS1 entries, but they do later on expand in complexity, and even some of the cutscenes feel like the same as they were in terms of camera composition and presentation. What I like about this approach is that you can see there was never this pressure at From to deliver something entirely different for the sake of showcasing what the PS2 could do, but instead they used all of that extra horsepower the new consoles afforded to enhance and elevate the existing presentation. For example, the briefings are now fully voice acted, which goes a long way to immerse you.
We have no idea why Zeo has entered this zone, but we have jurisdiction over the old facilities, and unauthorized corporate encroachment will not be tolerated.
Or the more intricate customization with your AC, where you can paint one component per layer, which that alone can get you hooked for hours. Like mentioned, the game still retains much of the legwork done in the first 3 AC games, where the game loop revolves around accepting missions, completing them, and pimping out your mech with newer equipment for a more efficient mission progression as the difficulty subsequently rises. Some of the newly added features for Gen 2 mechs are radiators, as once the temperature of your AC passes a certain threshold, you start taking gradual temporary damage, the equivalent to being poisoned in Souls games, one could say. Overboost, which is actually a really significant gameplay addition that I didn't make much use of, to be honest. Energy shields, which is also significant, but I didn't make use of it personally because the energy consumption from my point of view didn't seem worth it when I could just bob and weave like a maniac. And the newer hover type legs, which are the light versions of the tank legs, allowing you to be more agile and faster, just to name a few. While much hasn't changed for the game design, I definitely do feel that my experience with PS1 AC made me more aware and conservative in a way I was now approaching the game. While I was more carefree when it came to the choices I made there, here I never took anything for granted, always taking a step back and observing if I really wanted to execute what I wanted on my own terms. For example, having a better understanding of how performance tuning and mission design both go hand in hand, like a couple under the moonlight, I actually stuck to my guns and focused exclusively on a light build and machine gun, which, side note, this gun is way too OP. So much so to the point of 97% of my playthrough being exclusively focused on it, as it carried me with ease. And now that I look back, maybe the build was pretty broken in terms of balancing, as I managed to beat the game in just shy of 6 hours in one sitting, which surprised me given how general consensus is how this game has very weird difficulty spikes, which to be fair it can be attributed to the controls, but alas, I never once during my playthrough felt wronged about the difficulty, as I knew I purely came down to how I was customizing my mech. I was also more entrenched in the storytelling, as the voice acting itself and the tone of the characters slightly influenced my choices and the type of missions and corporations I was keen to work with, and although the corporations are inherently evil in this universe, there is something about being an active participant in a scenario you have little personal influence in, at least in the first half of the game, that makes the experience really compelling, and I love the story the more for it. If there's just one point of criticism I can elevate is how the downtime for being hit is too severe, especially when you're being spammed, which honestly I wouldn't be surprised if it's a specific work for my build. One gameplay component that I should have mentioned that I forgot about in the PS1 AC games is the concept of Human Plus, which I find fascinating. So, during the events of the Great Destruction, or possibly even before, Human Plus started as a program that seeks to bridge the gap between technology and human evolution ever so closer. Transhumanism, if you will, as it seeks to enhance human with capabilities most would dream of. In-game, this occurs as a sort of permadeath mechanic where, once your credit score reaches below minus 50k, your Raven will undergo several experimentations that cybernetically meshes them to their AC to closely become one entity, and once finished, you'll restart the game from the beginning with new gameplay bonuses which can vary from enhanced booster performance, enhanced weight load capacity, enhanced cooling, just to name a few. And your name will be reset and relabeled as a test subject with a fixed name and an assortment of numbers, which is as grim of a concept as you can imagine. I don't know if I'll ever go out of my way to actually pursue it, but I like the idea of a game mechanic that not only helps novice players if they're struggling, but it's also structured in a way that it makes sense for the world lore. A major component of customization this time around is that you can have 3 different AC presets, which cuts time significantly when you intend to test drive them in the training grounds, battle in the arena, or in the missions themselves. But overall, looking at the whole picture, I'm pleasantly surprised at how minimal the customization advancements are for Gen 2 ACs. And to be fair, this could be a fault of mine for not really going into depth as much as I should. But customization remains relatively the same as the PS1 entries, besides the aforementioned new components I mentioned, which is a good thing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it and all that. The thing where I spent the most time though was coloring my character, which AC1 already allowed you that freedom, but I really never felt compelled to give it a go besides going with the default ones the game shipped with. But once I saw a speedrunning video from the game, I thought it would be a good idea to let myself loose and see how far I can go. And that's how I ended up with the Samus crossover event. I'm generally lukewarm on the soundtrack because coming out from Master of Arena and experiencing those really hardcore experimental tracks, it gave me the expectation to see more of them in AC2, and while the general music fits the themes and the overall energy present of this game, a select few particularly stand out, and I think this can be attributed to the much more expanded theme of composers present in this entry. Here, you see the recurring faces of Kota Hoshino and Keiichiro Segawa, which marks his last appearance in the series as a composer. But on top of that, you also have new additions such as Tsukasa Saito, who is currently widely known as the lead sound designer and composer for Bloodborne, Déraciné, Sekiro, and Elden Ring. Ikuya Ichinohe, who the only info I could find of them was their work on this entry, Another Age and nothing else. And finally, the guest German composer and DJ Mike Van Dyke, who composed the opening theme and also happened to have guest composed for Ridge Racer 5 as well. From the offset, what I really love about the soundtrack is this more subdued and ambient approach to some of the tracks present in the game, from Tic-Tac-Toe, Roundabout, and Mint. To the more extremes such as Lynch Law, Enjoyable, which you can immediately recognize the person behind it. All in all, AC2 is one of those entries that I really enjoyed, specifically for not messing too much with the core formula, but also sufficiently adding and adjusting just enough to make it feel refreshing and have me glued to my seat for 6 hours straight, which at the same time it baffles me a little bit how Another Age misses the mark for me. Another Age takes place 5 years after the final events of Armored Core 2, and in the aftermath of the attempted coup, the Earth's government failed to act upon one of their main goals, which was to relocate civilians from the underground cities to the Earth's surface, as they spend most of their might to strengthen their military presence should they need to go to extreme lengths towards these corps. With the major loss of influence this brought not just to the government but the corporations themselves, each one of them is secretly and to the best of their abilities slowly building up military potency to counterattack the moment war breaks, resulting in rising tensions not just for the major entities but also for the civilians as well. And to spice up the whole ordeal, a new intermediary of extreme actions known as Indies was introduced, as they work with both sides with the incentive of establishing a new government. You'd actually be surprised that for such an interesting sequence of events and detailed set of scenarios just oozing for gameplay to be spruced on top, Another Age so far is one of the most stripped out entries I've experienced so far. There are no males nor is there an arena to battle other ACs, which significantly cuts much of the long-term value of the game for me. Don't be surprised if you find threads of people asking if it's worth skipping it too, because at the end of the day, 100 missions really aren't that enticing unless you're a really hardcore fan and can't get enough of the well-structured story missions, which, if that's the case, more power to you. I didn't finish this game, as my breaking point was after doing more than 36 missions done and reaching the point where the difficulty increased to abnormous amount, like the 2 ACs you have to fight one after another, for example, and I really didn't have the patience to keep playing anymore, especially with the little story content available. But I'll say this though, to its benefit, those 100 missions bring out some of the best mission design Gen 2 has to offer, like the one where you have to disable bombs spread through a facility, or the ones where you have to defend an entrance with multiple MTs coming from the roof. Most of the variety is afforded by the amount of liberty this entry allows, as a sequel that doesn't have much significance to your unnamed Raven, and I genuinely had the most fun just stress testing my piloting abilities and how far I could go before calling quits. If I had to lean on which gen is my favorite so far, I'm inclined to say I still prefer Gen 1 over Gen 2. Nothing against AC2, but Playing the PS1 entries felt like a more complete package compared to Two and Another Age. I attribute some of that love to the novelty of deep diving into this universe and figuring out stuff as I went along, but the cohesion of those 3 titles so far remains unbeatable. AC2 on the other hand excellently excels in refining the formula, making sensible decisions for new game mechanics, and just overall immersing you in the world. And while AA doesn't quite reach that bar for me, it is still commendable for fleshing out more of what was possible to do, and I respect that a ton. Make sure to stick around, as in the next video we'll be discussing both Armored Core 3 and Silent Line and see what's up with them. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends, and activate the bell so you can get notification of my latest video, and thank you for watching.